Yeah. So here we're going to talk about, how digital learning acceleration is going on in the education industry. So let me first of all start with an introduction of our panel members. We have with us Professor Jose, who's a distinguished faculty of the IIM Bangalore, the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. And Professor Jose is a professor for strategy. Professor, do you want to say a quick hello to the audience?
Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right, and it's great to have Professor Jose. Our second panelist is Sudhir Kukreja. Sudhir represents the Credence International Schools. Sudhir is an equity analyst who's an educationalist with a rebellious mission to transform the education landscape of our country by embracing cutting-edge technology and getting rid of the conventional rote learning system. Welcome to the panel. Sudhir, do you want to say a quick hello to the audience?
Thank you so much, Ashish. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure being a part of this.
Great. And our third panelist is Aditya Malik. Aditya represents an organization called Talentedge. And Aditya is the CEO and MD of that organization, of Talentedge. Talentedge is one of the leading new age technology-driven interactive education companies. Aditya believes in the prowess of strong workforce and has meticulously built a team based on their core expertise and the determination to work with passion. Very quick hello to you, Aditya, and thanks for joining us for the panel.
Thanks, Ashish. Hi, good morning, everyone.
Right. Lastly, we have Amit Goyal. Amit is a senior leader and head of India and Southeast Asia for this organization called edX. And I'm pretty sure many of you would know about edX. edX is one of the world's leading, online platforms, e-learning platforms rather, which was founded by MIT and Harvard University alumni. Amit is also the man behind launching one of the world's cheapest PC tablets, which I learned about this morning only, Amit, Akash. Great resume and great profile, Amit, and it's great pleasure to have you on the panel. Thank you so much for joining us, Amit. Do you want to say a quick hello to the audience?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I look forward to having an engaging discussion with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, yeah, I think if I were to kind of talk about the profiles of these individuals in CVs, I think we would probably need a lot of time, which we don't have today because we just have 45 minutes, right? So I'm not going to talk about it, but I just wanted to, I'm really, really honored to be talking to these gentlemen because these guys are thought leaders. These guys are education thought leaders. And I think while all of them have different professions, we have two entrepreneurs in our panel. We have one professor in our panel, and we have one corporate leader in our panel. The common thread between all four of them is that they're all passionate for digital learning. They're all passionate about education. So it's a fantastic mix of people that we have today. Just to set a little bit of context of the session today, the reason why we are having this session, I'm pretty sure since last 7 months, I'm pretty sure all of us are aware of what's going on in the world, right? The world is not at the same place. It's a very different place. There is total chaos out there. There is total panic out there with the pandemic and COVID. There is a lot of disruption which is going on. And I think this whole pandemic has also disrupted the way the education industry is evolving, right? There is massive disruption for the traditional education industry. It is also impacting students, it is impacting faculties, it's impacting institutions. And I think it's very difficult for me to quantify the level of impact which is happening. It's very difficult, I think, for anybody, right? But then I'm a firm believer of the fact that with every crisis, there is an opportunity. And I think, what we are going to try to focus on today is how do we turn this crisis into opportunity? So we have broken down this discussion into different themes, and we will try to uncover those themes for you as we go through this panel discussion. The first theme is about affordability, and my first question is for Sudhir Kukreja. Sudhir, do you see education becoming more affordable? Or is it going to become more expensive with this whole disruption going on?
Well, thanks, Ashish, for a quick background. Now, as a school owner and someone who's operating schools across the geography of the country, where we have schools operating in cities like Hyderabad, which is a metro city, and then add to it cities like Aurangabad and Indore, which are tier 2 cities, and then something like Bid and Jalna and Dewas. These are tier 3 cities. So I think this question has multiple facets to it, which will probably have different answers when we look at this question in 3 different geographies, whether we're talking about metros or tier 1 cities or tier 2 cities in this country. Uh, Practically, if we take a look at the school scenario, so I'm going to break this answer into 2 parts. One, how this entire thing shapes up for school, and 2, how does it shape up for an individual child or a household. In terms of schools, I believe, the schools in the metro cities, or probably to an extent schools in the tier 1 cities, really already had this kind of an infrastructure so that they could cope with one such disruption. And that is where I think kudos to the teacher and the entire education fraternity, which has taken up the challenge and has quickly transformed itself into, from a brick and mortar model to a completely digital space where we have millions of kids across the country today who are learning for so many months on the digital platform. So for them, maybe that affordability would not be that big a concern as far as schools are concerned. But at the same time, if you look at the tier 3 cities and the rural segment of the country, schools which have been really at a lower, fee structure kind of a model, they are struggling big time. And for them to embrace something, in terms of this technology or infrastructure or the digital learning tools and the apps, etc., that we're putting in the market is going to be quite difficult. Coming to the other side, which is students, if Srishti can share that slide, which I have for the student distribution. So practically, we are a country which has somewhere close to 27 crore kids across the country and across the geographies. Now, out of these 27 crore kids, there are about 6% or 7% kids which belong to the rich strata, another 30% which are a mid-income. So for this first, as you can see on your screen, so this 38% on the left side graph would not really be a big deal, because this is one part of the economy or one part of our society which has a reasonably decent income to afford a good quality private school education, which is leading to this entire growth in the edtech space. So whether it is individual learning tools or digital solutions that we're talking about, for this 38%, I believe it's not a big task, and they would probably be able to afford the entire thing. The challenge as well as the opportunity lies in this aspiring class of 50%, which is primarily from the tier 1 or tier 2 city segment, where I believe all the tech solution providers or the schools and parents, all of us put together, will have to really put our effort into as to how do we make our technology solutions affordable and reachable to all these people, so that we could actually make a difference at a larger scale across the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sudhir, for all those insights. And some great stats, great insights there, great data points there. Sudhir, thanks for that. My next question, really quickly on the same topic, is for Professor Jose. Professor Jose, what is the role do you think institutions, communities, and most importantly, our government can play to make digital learning more affordable for the students and for the parents as well?
So, Ashish, thank you so much for having me on this panel. And I want to connect the question about affordability, the question of affordability with that of access, because I think they are very intricately connected and very intimately connected. So despite all the successes that we talk about, our expectation that digital innovation can make learning both affordable and accessible has not been met for various reasons. And if you look at India, you see it's a great example. We have the second largest online market in the world, but it also has the largest number of disconnected people. So we are number one in that list if you look at, right? In terms of the number of people disconnected, and then it happens to be China. If you compare this digital divide, but if you just kind of deconstruct the data and look at urban and rural areas, then you find the internet penetration in urban areas is about 65%, whereas in the rural area it's 20%. So in summary, over 50% of India's population remains unserved or underserved with regards to educational services for a variety of reasons. It's to do with infrastructure. It's to do with lack of access to devices also, and I will come to that in a moment. And the lack of access to devices is related to financial constraints. It is also to do with, there was until recently, in the last 1 or 2 years, there has been some effort, national effort. And there was simply a lack of interest among key stakeholders in bringing together these different elements of the ecosystem to make things more affordable. Now, what can you do? We have to accept our limitations. The fact that rural India doesn't have access to good internet is known, because if you've read the newspapers in the last couple of weeks, you find that, interestingly, in Kerala, which is relatively better connected, I think, students had to climb up to the roof of houses and tops of trees to access the online classes. So this whole model where you depend on continuous online access needs to go, because that is what is making access more unaffordable and actually inaccessible. uh, you know and so therefore the first thing we have to look at is we have to look at education in terms of adjusting our resources, and saying, can we simply go offline for part of the education? By offline, I don't mean physically into the classroom, but can we reduce the need for home internet connectivity? And then, of course, the cost then move from home to some other agencies, and we can talk about that. The second way to decrease cost and improve affordability is, can we work with the schools to expand the access at school? If you leave urban India and you go on to the rural parts of India, children don't have access to devices or continuous 24 by 7 high speed internet. And it's impossible to give that access. But can we make some hotspots for learning in schools and so on? And can this be supported by, corporate partnerships using CSR funds? It should be possible, I think, and that's the model we have to look at. We shouldn't really look at providing access to every child in their home. We should look at providing access to every child in a common space. And this is where community and community institutions can play a role, because a lot of India has very strong NGO organizations and community organizations and schools and so on. So that's where we work with community. And finally, I think there is a need for strong corporate partnerships. During the COVID time, and Amit might be able to talk more about it, both edX and Coursera made all their courses, just available to all interested. They just took away the price. I'm sure, that also helped them improve their, their own access to students. But the fact of the matter is, once you take away the price, a large number of students do get into this, because at least one part of the equation is taken care of, which is you don't have to pay for the course. And that's where I think, educational entrepreneurs can play a role. And on the other hand, I think government needs to really look at how do you provide lower cost internet access to students, if not to students, to institutions. Thank you.
Awesome. These are some great words of wisdom, Professor Jose. I specifically liked the point you made around how schools and educational institutions in the rural side, how they can act as a, hub spot, right? Like a spot. And it doesn't have to, it's not necessary for students to have decided, but those schools can actually become the mediator or facilitator. Great points, Dr. Jose. So let's quickly move on to our next theme in this particular topic, which is around technology. And my next question is going to be for Amit. Amit, are you ready for my next question?
Absolutely.
So Amit, given the fact that you have been working in this field for a very long time and you have had a very close association with digital learning, I think digital learning is more relevant now this year than it has been ever before. What are some of the key trends that you're currently seeing in the education industry, and where do you think this is all heading?
So I think first and foremost, the pandemic has finally given its due to the tech players. The adoption that we have seen during the last 6 months, I mean, that has skyrocketed for every tech player. So I think this time has really helped every stakeholders, especially the parents, the teachers, the students, to really wholeheartedly explore the merits and demerits of edtech. Earlier, what we used to see is teachers, they were always, and especially when I used to visit tier 2 and tier 3 areas, teachers were the one who resisted the technology the most. They actually saw edtech as a threat. They failed to understand that edtech is actually here to make their jobs, to make their life easier. But now with a much needed nudge, something similar that happened with demonetization to e-commerce, the same thing is happening to edtech and to the learning as a whole now. So what we are looking at today is everywhere we are talking about integrated learning. Schools, colleges, higher education institute, corporate learning, they're all adopting integrated learning. So while traditional learning is currently unavailable due to reasons known all to us, uh, the professors, the students, the teachers, they're all coming together to offer integrated learning, to offer blended learning, and really, get the true merits of flipped learning. In terms of edtech, what we're also looking at is, if I talk about our data, what we saw is during the first 6 weeks of pandemic, we actually doubled up our number. The number which took us 6 years to achieve, we doubled up on those numbers. In terms of technology adoption, what we also saw is there was a 300% growth in the open source technology. So edX also manages a platform called OpenEdX. So OpenEdX, edX is actually an instance of OpenEdX. This is one of the world's largest open source platform, wherein any edtech provider can host in their courses, host in their content, create a whole certification, assessment, analytics mechanism. So until the last 6 years, we had about 2,200 instances of OpenEdX. In the last 6 months, the number has actually increased to 3,000. So I think everyone is going gung-ho about leveraging the open source platform, the technology, particularly to edtech. Very quickly talking about the three key trends that we see in education is edtech is actually making education modular. So you don't really necessarily have to go to a campus to get your education. Today, education is being delivered through multiple sources. It is doing the same thing which happened to retail earlier. It is becoming omni-channel. Plus, it is getting modular. So students are able to complete a part of their semester online using digital learning tools, using proctored examinations, using capstone projects, and universities and colleges, they're able to give them credits for it. And lastly, education is actually technology has made education lifelong. So if you would ask a working professional who has been out of college for like 5 years, 7 years, would they want to go back to the college? There might be a desire, but the circumstances would not allow them to do so. With this whole shift with digital learning, I think they are truly able to realize the benefits of lifelong learning. They are able to take anytime, anywhere education across all in-demand skills and technologies. And we've also witnessed, close to 250% growth in the enterprises who use our courses to upskill their workforce. So these are some of the trends that we are seeing between edtech and learning as a whole.
Thanks a lot, Amit. Those are great, great numbers. Maybe a couple of years back, we couldn't have expected those kind of numbers, right? Suddenly, you're seeing like, it's like, I don't know, 10x, 20x kind of growth you're seeing. You spoke about a couple of important things: integrated learning, modular learning. I think in all true sense, I think education is becoming uncaged, right? It's coming out of its traditional form. It's getting unleashed, right? It's not confined anymore within a particular setup. So I think that is one of the biggest, personally to me, that's one of the biggest advantages of digital learning, because you can do it at your own convenience, right? You're not really restricted to logistics and everything. Thanks, Amit. Very quickly, moving over to the next question. The next question is again for Professor Jose. Professor Jose, how do you think we can increase equity and access in the digital learning space? And if you could just briefly, explain what does equity mean for our audience here?
So, Ashish, I really like the way you said education has been unchained. And frankly, the real question is whether you unchained a dragon. And I will explain that why. Because when you talk about equity, we are talking about both accessibility, affordability, and managing the diversity. And all of these are very important in our context. In another way, if you think about it, access is really about or empowering, and equity is also about empowering people. The problem we have is often when we talk about access or equity, we just limit ourselves to physical access and affordability. You see, do people have access? Can they afford a device? Can they have access to internet? Reasonably high-speed internet, so that they can access all these materials. But when we are talking about equity, you are not talking about a number of other things. For instance, and I'm using equity as empowering. Then you're saying, how do you empower the differently able students? Not everybody, is able to, have the same abilities, right? They may be slow learners. They may be physically handicapped people. Simple thing. They may be colorblind people who simply can't make much sense of these, these colorful slides that we've made, and so on. There could be students handicapped by economic conditions, social conditions, gender-related issues. How do we deal with each of these? And sometimes I think as educators or technology providers, we don't really look at all of this with as much detail as we need to. Let's take differently abled. So the solution is really simple. We can go for assistive technologies. And there are a lot of interesting entrepreneurial experiments that are now happening, where people are saying, how do we kind of get knowledge across to people who might be differently able than us? But that is fine. But let me look at something else. Today, every school uses Zoom. And, and we insist that the videos must be switched on. Now, if you think about it, tech and remote teaching are now allowing us to get into our students' homes. I know virtual background is possible, but it's not possible for everybody, right? And have you considered that in this situation, stark differences are being highlighted? When you get into a school, everybody wears the same uniform. But when you get into their homes and each one of us can see each other, you see very different backgrounds. What kind of impact is that going to have on the students? We have to really consider that, right? So the next question is, how do you make these students feel safe and welcome in these digital environments? And these are actually, I think, very important questions. And I don't really have answers to that, but I think these are questions that we really need to look at very, very carefully. Especially,
Absolutely.
Especially one last sentence, especially given the fact that we have said that there's a huge digital divide. So then the question is, we have to use technology to make this education empowering for the vast majority of population that's now literally unserved or at best underserved. Thank you.
Great. I think these are some really, really powerful questions. And I think as we're going through this, Professor Jose, as we're going through this period, as we're going through this transition, right? Like as you see my next slide, it's all about the transition, right? I think these are questions that all of us together need to kind of solve, right, about the digital equity, the parity. And I see there are some questions from our audience, and I'm going to get to those questions very soon. But before that, I want to bring up a questions for Aditya. And Aditya, I have not asked you a question yet, so my apologies for that. So I think the next question is around the audience, right, like the end users. And my question to you is, Aditya, how do you think we can make digital learning more effective, engaging, and impactful?
Thanks, Ashish. I think the key is to some extent not view digital learning as different from traditional learning. Digital learning has to be seen as an enabler to enhance the learning experience and not seen as a separate work stream altogether. Unfortunately, much before pandemic hit, one side was the traditional learning and the other side was e-learning. It was a divide like between two, like a Chinese wall between the two pieces of it. Now, hopefully, what we are seeing now, that with more and more colleges and more students moving on to it, it is getting mainstreamed. So I think the first and foremost thing what we will need to do is to make sure that the experience is not compromised and the rigor of traditional learning is maintained while we go through it. So what do I mean by that? Which means, if in a traditional learning, the interaction, the experience, the entire entire piece of having, say, for example, if you have an entrance test for this thing, you have a Q&A session, you have case studies, you are interacting with the faculty live, as Professor Jose was saying that we have a Zoom class everywhere. I think the key for us is to make sure that you start with the premise and say whatever you can do in a physical classroom should be able to done in a learning in a e-learning world. And today it's possible using technology. I mean, elections are being fought nowadays with digital campaigning, and a classic example was when Prime Minister Modi and Odisha Chief Minister used the holographic technology in villages in rural area for the rural people to click photograph with them, and that was a major hit. It's a case study on it as well. So if a holographic technology allows Odisha Chief Minister in the middle of an election to click a photograph with a villager, this technology can give them the same experience as they are experiencing in a real-time classroom. Because the moment you take away the real-time classroom experience, it becomes inferior. Imagine the power that somebody sitting in a village is being taught by Professor Jose from I am Bangalore, and is getting the same experience as he or she would have got in the I am Bangalore campus. So the first, I think we should replicate the physical classroom. Two, I think we should make sure that to give the comfort to the teachers and the students, the rigor should not get compromised in any aspect of whether it's an entrance, exam, education, the entire rigor of the ecosystem. That's the power for us. We should not let go of that. So in my mind, these two are the two things which have to be the bedrock for making sure the digital learning gets due.
Thanks a lot, Aditya. Great views again. Thank you so much. My next question, I'm actually going to couple it with an audience question. So I had a different question in mind, but I see a very similar question posed by one of our audience, and I'm going to put this to Sudhir. And I think, Sudhir, this is a question that you and me also discussed about very briefly. Considering that teachers are major stakeholders in revolutionizing the process of education, should accessibility be talked in terms of lack of familiarity with tech-based education, especially in smaller cities?
Well, thanks, Ashish, for connecting the question. I was anyways wanting to connect it because I could actually relate to it. And while I answer this question in the context of the teachers being ready for this entire thing, I think I'll go back a little in the conversation to what Amit and Aditya added here. In the pre-pandemic times, like Amit mentioned and Aditya also did, that normal classrooms, the brick and mortar schools, and the digital learning were seen as two different parts of the society. And at the same time, during the pandemic, teachers have done a commendable job to go onto a complete digital platform, embrace the technology, acquire the skills, bear with all the hiccups and the challenges that the technology throws in the delivery process. But I think the challenge here is that something that we've achieved in this pandemic phase, where the teachers have really not left with any other option but forced to embrace this technology and acquire these skills at a very quick pace. The key challenge would be to see as to how far does this remain sustainable, and I think that is what the entire edtech industry is also talking about. And as the audience question points out, the challenge here is that the teachers have a severe lack of familiarity with all these tech-based educational solutions. I will somewhere attribute this part to the kind of system that we operate with. Traditionally, a school's timetable, that 8 hours which a teacher and a child would end up spending in the school, is so crampedly packed with the teacher's schedule that a teacher ends up taking almost 6 to 7 lectures in a day. Now, I believe that is where the school managements or the government or the governing bodies, etc., need to look at as to how do we structure an entire thing, that syllabus, that timetable, or whatever that distribution of time is. But that time within the school itself, because teachers' life at home is crazy, so really can't expect them to be investing themselves. Because I operate these many schools, I know how difficult it is for them to manage things between the school, the correction work, and the home, etc. So the schools will have to create a process whereby the teachers can be given, one, an access, two, an opportunity, three, the infrastructure and the availability of maybe such trainers or courses, etc., where they could actually make themselves familiar with this entire teaching learning tool, which because of this pandemic, they've been forced to, some of them have really loved it, enjoyed it, embraced it completely, and are now wanting to explore it further. But there is still a vast community which still doesn't have a good access to it. They are still fearful, are still looking for maybe some mentors or pre-curated courses or guided exercises which can help them navigate through this. Within our system of schools, we've got teachers who keep continuously calling us and asking us for various inputs to be given, as in when they are thrown with a new challenge, something that comes from a parent side or a child side. How do I assist the child on Google tool, or how do I assist the child on Adobe tool, or how do I do it on this and or that? So there are different technologies which are brought into the system by the management, and the kids are embracing it, accepting it. But the teachers, let's understand, teachers are not progressing as quick as maybe our younger generation is. So they need hand-holding, they need time, they need that structured approach to go into this whole process of unlearning and relearning the entire methodology of delivering quality content using technology.
Great point, Sudhir. And I think our teachers need a lot of support, right, from every aspect, right? Be it from the administration of that institution, be it from the government, be it from the communities. But that framework is very important. And now, as you rightly said, this is a forced change, right? And I do believe that instead of fighting the change, we need to embrace the change. We need to make friends with the change, as there will be good things. And so, great point, Sudhir.
I'm sorry, I'm barging in again. Another one point which I missed and I'd like to add. So in this pandemic, if you take a look, there are two big names which have come up across the educational fraternity in schools. One is Google for Education, the other is Zoom. Why was this so? Because this is where the corporate world actually came in the support of the education fraternity and the schools, and this is where they're. So the more of such things which can be provided to the teachers and the education segment, I guess the more it will become. So teachers are great influencers which can in fact help the corporates in the longer run to help them penetrate more into the student fraternity as well.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And representing one such technology company, I can definitely relate to what you just said. And there is a lot of such partnerships which are required to solve this problem, right? We need to think about these partnerships. Great examples, Sudhir. I'll quickly move over to the next question, and I will again combine an audience question with one of the questions that we had thought about, which is with respect to accessibility. And my next question is going to be for Aditya again. So Aditya, the question is, how can we ensure that the benefits of traditional learning, like networking, learning from each other, it continues to remain in an online environment as well? We're not compromising on those, or we're not missing out on those.
Sure. Long back when I used to work for GE, we all used to, GE's training system used to be fairly good, and we all used to be feel good that we were nominated for trainings and all that stuff. And then we were told that the key for success, and that was a Jack Welch era, when we were told that the key for success for GE in those days in building great leaders is three things. One is education, second is experience, and third is exposure. So in my mind, and that has stuck with me, and that's how we have seen that in Talentedge also when we have gone through building the company. The key is that the learning is not only about what is being taught in the classroom. The key is also the exposure and the experience which the students go through when they are going through the learning. And that's why institutes like IIMs and XLRIs and MICAs and IFTs are successful, because they provide that platform. Now, if we build, nowadays good thing is that technology allows all these things. For example, in a lot of our courses, what we have consciously built is the fact that there is a concept of CXO experience sharing, which means that we have picked up relevant cases which are important for that domain, and getting the industry CXOs to come in and teach, and not teach is a wrong word, but talk about those from a practical industrial aspect. And that serves two purposes. One, it allows the students or the learners to connect with those CXOs, helps in networking. Two, they also get to know the practical aspects, because when a CXO is discussing that case and talking about that case, it happened in their industry, and then it gives a different dimension to that piece of it. So, and that's one. Two, as much as possible in ensuring that you have capstone projects, simulations, games, etc. built in, which give the student the real-time experience as they would have got in a physical classroom. You would have gone through the same piece of it. So the key is that not just using technology to deliver micro videos and app-based things. The key is how do we integrate the principles of traditional education of experience and exposure by getting CXOs to teach, building simulations, building capstones, and making sure a community is built and is engaged. Even if it means that on a 100-hour program, for example, or a 200-hour program, you get all of them together once in 6 months in a place, and make sure that they have a practical simulation going on there, and they bond and they build a community around that. I think those things have to be inculcated, and goes back to the point which I earlier made. Don't see digital education as in isolation. See that as an integrated part of the education system and blend those in, and then it will deliver great results.
Awesome. Thanks, Aditya. I think, you are referring to this whole concept of blended learning, right? So it should not we should not see digital learning as completely, out of it. It should be part of that entire framework, entire structure itself. Great thoughts, Aditya. Thanks once again. And I'm going to switch to the next theme around accessibility. I think this is a very interesting question, and it's like a most frequently asked question. And I'm going to put this question to Sudhir again. Sudhir, do you think technology has made inroads into average household and schooling ecosystem, and specifically talking about our country, India, right? Do you think we are at a point where we can say technology is there to support like a totally digital learning ecosystem?
So I think I'll connect my answer to what Professor Jose shared a little while ago. Accessibility to an average household is, in today's context, completely linked to the access to internet. Because I think 9 out of the 10 edtech solutions that we're talking about are delivered through an internet platform. In terms of schools, I believe a large chunk of schools in tier 1 and tier 2 cities have already embraced technology. If we were to talk about it 5 years ago, what is edtech? Maybe somebody would not have heard of it. Maybe 10%, 20%, 30% people were aware of it. But there is today a E&Y report which says that, okay, at least 67, 68% of our education fraternity and the student base is well aware of what is edtech, what are digital learning solutions, how are they. The question now is, how do you give them that access? How do you bring them into that ecosystem? So it's more about that accessibility to internet, or maybe that affordability of that cost, which is the larger theme of our overall discussion that we are having here. In terms of schools, they have left, right, and center embrace technology. Pretty much every school is, kind of trying to explore new options. What are the new technologies coming in? What are the new solutions being proposed? How do they bring in efficiency? While they are always conscious of the cost at which they are coming, and that is probably one of the impediments, in terms of embracing them and how quickly they go around with it. But I believe it's taking shape. It's coming up with time. Just like Professor Jose mentioned, that if we have some offline solutions, I think one input that I probably have shared on a couple of platforms earlier here is that most of the edtech startups these days, or the digital service providers, they have started going on a per child per month kind of a model. Now that is where I think these digital solutions are becoming a little difficult for schools to embrace and adopt, because typically if I'm a school operator and I have to take 10 applications or 10 solutions which are being proposed by 10 different companies, and I end up paying 100 rupees per child per month sort of a figure, that becomes almost 20-30% of my revenue at the end of the year. So that is something which someone needs to be very conscious about, because every month I'm approached by 10 edtech startups coming in and saying that, okay, it's just 100 rupees per child. But if you look at it, 100 rupees per child for 10 companies, 12 months, that becomes 12,000 rupees per child, which is more than at least 25% of the average fees of at least 80% schools in India. And that's where I think that adoption is becoming a little difficult, and we might need to rethink this model. I keep talking to a lot of principals and school owners across India who will always propose to a edtech company that come to me with a solution whereby I can pay you a price at the start of it. I understand there is a development cost, etc., that goes into it. I don't mind paying for it for first 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But beyond that point, I also know it for a fact, and you also know it for a fact that the maintenance cost is not as high as the development cost. So you have to, come off a blended model whereby we could actually make it sustainable and long-term, affordable for the schools as well.
Right, Sudhir. I think both Amit and Aditya have made note of your points, and Amit is kind of smiling and right. How do we solve this problem? So the next theme is about experience and impact. I'm going to start with the impact, and my next question is going to be for Amit Goyal, and I'm going to take an audience question, Amit. So how does the monetization model for edtech companies change from addressing urban population versus rural population? And we really have 3 minutes, Amit. So I would want you to answer like as quickly as possible so that we can take a couple more questions.
So I think I've been fortunate enough to work on two very large-scale projects. One was Akash tablet that was aimed to bridge the digital divide. A tablet which was one of the most affordable one. And at that time, when we were making the tablet, I think the intention was not to really monetize it, but how do we make a change? How do we make an impact? But in order to do so, the technology providers have to make sure they are able to self-sustain themselves. So one of the ways in which edtech players could actually monetize is wherever they could see that there could be revenue streams which could be affordable for someone. For example, someone in a tier 1 city would be able to afford a subscription of 1,000 rupees a month. But if you go to a tier 2 or tier 3 area, I think that might be very bizarre. So what some players could do and should be doing is they may look at alternative ways of monetization. I think advertisement for relevant content of relevant services is one. And then maybe they could, so this is what we did with the hardwares. What we are doing at the software, or I would say at the content level, is at edX, what we have done is we have made education absolutely free. So today, if anyone in any part of the world, right, literally any part of the world, they want to study anything from, let's say, Professor Joss, who teaches at IIM Bangalore, or someone at MIT or Harvard or Berkeley or Columbia or any top institute, they could just go to these platforms, learn absolutely free. They just need to have the will. They just need to have some basic internet connectivity. And thanks to Geo, I think the penetration has significantly increased. So I think gone are the days when students would be able to say, because I didn't have this, myself in class 12th, I was not able to afford high quality education. I think everything is out there.
Okay.
Students just have to, go out and explore.
Amit,
And how would we, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, but I'll have to kind of intervene because we just left with 1 minute. Otherwise, we'll get kicked out of this room. I wanted to thank all of you guys for being part of this panel and really appreciate all your thoughts and views. Great connecting with all of you. And I hope our audience has, taken away some takeaways, notes, which they can actually start implementing and using in their transition towards this whole, digital learning and digital transformation. I'll hand it back to Srishti.
Thank you, speakers, for an amazing discussion. Thank you to our moderator, Ashish, for keeping the discussion relevant, significant, and so exciting. Thank you to our CX partners, Zendex, and cloud partner, Amazon Web Services.